Sometimes, it's not the grand acts of charity that save lives, but the quiet, unnoticed gestures that come from a stranger's heart. One hoodie. One moment. One choice. That was all it took to change his destiny forever. The city never looked as cruel as it did under the biting December winds. Cars rushed past with windows fogged by warm heaters, and shop windows glowed with Christmas lights, but for Daniel, none of that warmth belonged to him. He sat hunched against the brick wall of a grocery store, his arms wrapped around his thin chest as if his skin alone could shield him from the cold. His clothes were ripped, his shoes too small, and his breath came out in clouds, fading quickly into the night air. Every part of him screamed for rest, for warmth, for a bed that didn't exist. He was just 21, yet life had already knocked him down harder than most could imagine. Losing his parents in a car accident, bouncing through foster homes that cared more for the paycheck than the children, and finally aging out of the system with nothing but a bag of worn-out clothes, Daniel had been left to fight the world alone. He had been homeless for months, sleeping under bridges, in bus shelters, and sometimes curled up behind dumpsters just to avoid the eyes of people who passed him with disgust. That night, though, the cold was sharper than ever before. His body trembled violently, his fingers were turning pale, and he knew if he didn't find something soon, anything, he might not see the morning. His stomach growled from days without food, but hunger wasn't the threat anymore. Hypothermia was. He watched people come and go, holding shopping bags, laughing with friends, wrapped in jackets and scarves. Nobody looked at him long enough to notice the desperation in his eyes. He was invisible, forgotten in plain sight. Every minute felt heavier, every gust of icy wind pierced deeper. Daniel pressed his forehead against his knees and whispered to himself, just one warm thing, just one. He wasn't asking for much, just a small break from the storm. But the night stretched on endlessly, and hope was a luxury he couldn't afford. That was when footsteps slowed near him. He didn't bother looking up at first. Usually, people slowed down only to make sure they weren't too close to him. But this time, the steps stopped. And a voice, calm and gentle, said, "Hey man, you look cold." Daniel lifted his head and blinked against the dim streetlight, seeing a young man around his age holding a hoodie in his hands. The stranger's face wasn't filled with pity, it was filled with sincerity. Before Daniel could speak, the hoodie was extended toward him. "Here, take it. It's clean. It'll keep you warm tonight." Daniel froze, staring at the piece of clothing as though it were treasure. His cracked lips parted, but no words came. It wasn't just a hoodie, it was hope. And in that moment, hope was enough to save him. Daniel slid his arms into the hoodie, and the feeling was almost overwhelming. It wasn't brand new, but it was soft, thick, and warm. As soon as it wrapped around him, he could breathe again. The cold still nipped at his face and hands, but his chest, his back, his arms, they had a shield now. Tears burned his eyes, not from the wind but from the weight of kindness that pressed against his heart. The stranger crouched beside him, his eyes steady and without judgment. "My name's Adam," he said simply, as though they weren't two people from different worlds, but two equals sharing a moment in the night. "What's yours?" Daniel hesitated, his voice hoarse from lack of use. Daniel." Adam smiled faintly. "Well, Daniel, I don't know what brought you here, but you don't deserve to freeze." He didn't ask questions, didn't press for details, didn't make Daniel explain his life. That alone was a kindness Daniel hadn't experienced in a long time. For most people, being homeless meant being interrogated. What mistake did you make? What crime did you commit? Why don't you just get a job? But Adam didn't ask any of that. He just offered warmth. "Thank you," Daniel whispered, hugging the hoodie tighter. You don't know what this means." Adam nodded. "Sometimes, a little warmth can change a lot." He stood to leave but hesitated, pulling something else from his pocket. It was a granola bar. "It's not much, but it might help. He placed it next to Daniel without waiting for a reaction. Then, with a simple wave, he walked away, disappearing into the night. Daniel sat there in silence, staring after him, clutching the hoodie as if it were the only thing tethering him to life. And maybe it was. That night, he didn't shiver as violently. That night, he didn't feel as invisible. That night, for the first time in months, he closed his eyes and thought, maybe tomorrow will come. Maybe I'll survive. He didn't know then that the hoodie wasn't just fabric, it was a thread, pulling him slowly toward a future he couldn't yet imagine. But deep in his heart, a spark had been lit, and it refused to go out. The days that followed were still hard. Daniel still struggled with hunger, still searched for safe places to rest, still faced the looks of strangers who judged him without knowing his story. But something was different now. That hoodie wasn't just warmth, it was a reminder that not everyone looked away. Every time he pulled it over his head, he felt like someone out there believed he mattered, even if it was just one stranger on a cold night. That belief carried him forward in small but important ways. He began visiting a local shelter during the day, not just for food but to ask about opportunities. The shelter staff noticed his determination, his hunger not just for meals but for change. One volunteer connected him with a program offering temporary housing for young adults trying to get back on their feet. It wasn't much, a shared room, a few basic meals, but it was stability. With a roof over his head, Daniel finally had the energy to search for work. At first, rejection hit him hard. Nobody wanted to hire someone without a home address, without polished clothes, without a history of normal. But Daniel kept trying. He clutched at the idea that Adam's small act of kindness meant the world still had space for him. That conviction kept him walking into job interviews, filling out forms, and asking for chances. Eventually, a cafe owner saw something in him. "You look like a hard worker," she said after watching him clean up tables at the shelter's meal service. "I'll give you a shot." It wasn't glamorous, washing dishes, sweeping floors, stocking supplies, but it was honest work. And for Daniel, it was a lifeline. He threw himself into it with everything he had. His boss noticed his dedication, and soon he was trusted with more responsibilities. Within months, he wasn't just surviving, he was beginning to rebuild. Each night, when he hung his hoodie by his bed, he whispered, "Thank you." It was as if Adam's presence was still with him, cheering him on silently. That hoodie had been the bridge between despair and hope, between giving up and moving forward. And Daniel vowed he would never forget it. Years passed. Daniel was no longer the trembling young man on the sidewalk. He had saved enough money to rent his own apartment, later enough to start evening classes, and eventually earned a degree in social work. His dream wasn't to chase riches, it was to give back, to be the stranger for someone else that Adam had once been for him. He began working with homeless outreach programs, walking the same streets he once slept on, carrying supplies in a backpack. Blankets, snacks, and yes, hoodies. One winter evening, while handing out warm clothes to people curled up against walls and under bridges, Daniel's past returned in the most unexpected way. A man approached from the crowd of volunteers, older, but unmistakable. It was Adam. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Without a word, he stepped forward and pulled him into an embrace. "You don't remember me, do you?" Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. Adam shook his head gently, puzzled. Daniel smiled through tears. "Years ago, you gave me a hoodie. I was freezing, and that one gesture saved me." Adam's eyes widened in recognition, then softened. You're the kid." Daniel nodded, laughing and crying all at once. "I made it because of you. And now, I'm out here helping others, because of you." The two men stood in the cold night, bound by a single act of kindness that had rippled across years. Daniel handed a hoodie to a shivering teenager nearby and glanced back at Adam. Sometimes, he said softly, one small gesture changes everything. And in that moment, under the same kind of cold sky where it had all begun, Daniel finally understood, kindness doesn't just warm the body, it saves the soul. Kindness doesn't have to be big to be life-changing. One hoodie, one meal, one smile, it can save someone's tomorrow. If this story touched your heart, share it with others, spread kindness wherever you go, and remember, you might be the stranger who saves a life. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Kindness Vibes for more real and heart-touching stories. Together, let's make kindness go viral.